"Excuse me, ma'am. Passengers in uniform need to wait by the side gate," snapped the flight attendant, blocking the narrow jetway with her body. Sergeant Danielle Harris blinked once, slowly. She had barely stepped off the carpeted boarding area, her duffel heavy against her hip, when the woman shoved an open palm against her shoulder, firm enough to make her stumble half a step back. The murmurs behind her grew louder. Some passengers whispered, some chuckled. Danielle straightened, breathing steady through her nose. She stood 5'8", lean muscle under her pressed Army combat uniform. Her name tape, Harris, was stitched right above her heart, alongside her American flag patch. "I'm assigned to this flight," Danielle said quietly, voice even. "I'm traveling on official orders." The flight attendant, blonde hair in a tight bun, crisp navy blazer, scoffed without even glancing at her paperwork. "A lot of people say that. ID, please. Orders. Something real." She barked loud enough for others to hear. Danielle heard it. The doubt, the accusation curled inside the words, like she was pretending, like she didn't belong. The back of her throat burned. Passengers shifted, creating a little half circle around the standoff. Cell phones started sliding up, recording, pretending not to. The gate agent, a young white man in khakis, looked over and hesitated, then quickly ducked behind the counter, pretending to be busy. Danielle's fingers brushed the laminated military ID clipped to her front pocket. She had nothing to prove, and yet here she was, humiliated like a child accused of stealing candy. "Ma'am," Danielle said slowly, "you're making a mistake." The flight attendant's lip curled. "You're making a scene. Either show credentials, or step aside." Another little shove, sharper this time, pushing Danielle back toward the wall of the jetway. The bag on her shoulder bumped awkwardly against her side. Her knuckles whitened where she gripped the strap. Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed. The smell of jet fuel and stale carpet filled the narrow tunnel. Danielle inhaled once, deep and clean. She was a soldier. She was trained for bigger wars than this. But still, God, it hurt. The quiet cruelty of it. The way no one, not the flight crew, not the airline staff, not even the sympathetic-looking passengers, stepped forward. The way her uniform, the literal cloth of her service, was treated like a Halloween costume. Another deep breath. Another silence. Danielle unclipped her ID with careful fingers and held it out. The flight attendant barely glanced at it before waving her off dismissively. "Fine, whatever. Go sit. Just don't cause any more problems." She turned her back as if Danielle were invisible. Danielle stood there a moment longer, alone in the stale, humming hallway, with humiliation thick in her chest. Then, slowly, she walked onto the plane, seat 3A, first class, right-hand window, assigned, paid for by the Department of Defense. She sat down, moving with the mechanical grace soldiers knew. Don't cause a scene, don't break discipline, stay small until it's safe to be big. The other first-class passengers, mostly businessmen and a few tired-looking couples, gave her little sideways looks. Some smiled tightly, most didn't. Danielle set her duffel under her seat, buckled her belt, and stared straight ahead. Outside, the tarmac shimmered in the afternoon heat. Inside, her heart pounded, slow, steady, and full of a different kind of fight. Her right hand slipped into the side pocket of her uniform pants, felt for the secure black device she always carried on missions. A satellite phone, direct line to command. She didn't pull it out yet. Didn't move. Didn't blink. The flight attendant, the same one who shoved her, now floated down the aisle offering sparkling waters and pretzels, smiling sweetly at the white businessman, passing Danielle without even a nod. She wasn't seen. She wasn't served. She wasn't even acknowledged. Danielle's jaw tightened, a small pulse in her cheek. They think you're small. They think you're nothing. They think you won't fight back. She leaned her head against the cold plastic window, closed her eyes for a beat, steadied her breathing. Then, with the slow, deliberate movement of a soldier following orders. Her own orders. She unhooked the satellite phone. No flash, no panic, just purpose. She punched a code with 2 fingers. The line clicked once, twice, then connected. Sergeant Harris, verification code Bravo 79er, requesting immediate intervention at Gate 42, Flight 1806. Incident involving hostile airline personnel. Uniformed service member mistreatment. Potential security breach. The voice on the other end didn't even hesitate. Acknowledged. Sit tight. We're grounding the flight. Danielle smiled. The faintest, smallest, most dangerous smile, and slipped the device back into her pocket. Outside, the jet engines whined up to power. Inside, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came on, strained. "We are experiencing a slight delay. Please remain seated and await further instructions." The hum of polite conversation dipped into uneasy murmurs. Flight attendant glanced nervously toward the cockpit. Danielle sat still, hands folded neatly on her lap. Waiting. Calm. Ready. This fight wouldn't be in the hallway. This fight would be in the headlines. And for once, everybody would see. "Excuse me, everyone, please remain seated," the captain repeated over the intercom, his voice tight like a stretched rope ready to snap. The flight attendant, her name tag reading Karen B., bustled up the aisle, her heels clicking against the thin carpet. Her smile was gone now, replaced by tight lips and darting eyes. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Phones were already up, some openly recording. A businessman 2 rows ahead whispered, "Something's wrong." Danielle didn't move. She sat tall in her first-class seat, her uniform crisp against the navy leather, her hands resting calmly on her thighs. Her presence was now impossible to ignore. Karen leaned into the galley phone and spoke in a frantic whisper, half hissing, into the receiver. Minutes stretched like hours, then heavy footsteps. 2 airport security officers appeared at the front of the plane, followed by a man in a dark suit flashing a badge too quickly to catch. Karen's shoulders relaxed for a moment, as if rescue had come. The man in the suit spoke first, loud enough for half the plane to hear. "We're looking for Sergeant Danielle Harris." A few passengers turned their heads. Danielle stood up slowly, adjusting her duffel strap across her chest. "Present," she said, her voice steady and clear. The man, Agent Collins, nodded with a clipped motion. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," he said. Karen smirked. The little glint of victory flashed in her eyes. Danielle moved, forward head high, but as she stepped into the aisle, Agent Collins held up a hand, not toward her, but toward Karen. "You too, ma'am," he said sharply. Karen froze. "What? Me? I'm staff. I was just..." "Step off the aircraft. Now," Collins repeated, voice hard as steel. The passengers stirred, murmurs growing louder. The businessman who had been recording zoomed in closer, sensing the real story unfolding. Karen stammered, her words tumbling over each other, but Collins wasn't listening. Neither was Danielle. Danielle followed silently as the group made their way back down the jetway, back into the terminal where the sticky scent of pretzels and floor cleaner filled the air. A cluster of transportation security officers were waiting, radios crackling at their hips. Behind them, 2 more suited agents, arms folded. Karen's face was pale now, the color draining from her cheeks. "Is there some mistake?" she whispered, eyes darting. "We're investigating a complaint," said one of the agents calmly. "Serious mistreatment of a United States service member on federal travel." "Orders," Danielle said nothing. She didn't need to. The weight of the uniform spoke louder than any words could. Passengers filing out of the plane craned their necks to see the scene. Phones pointed like silent witnesses. "Please move along," barked one officer, herding gawkers. "Away." Inside a glass-walled office, Danielle was offered a seat at a long table. Karen was led to a separate chair across from her. The atmosphere crackled. Thick, tense, suffocating. An agent clicked on a small recorder. A red light blinked to life. "Sergeant Harris, please describe the incident." Danielle's voice, when she spoke, was clinical, precise, The way soldiers gave debriefings after battle. No anger, no dramatics, just truth. At approximately 13:47 hours, while attempting to board Flight 1806, I was physically shoved by a flight attendant. I identified myself as a soldier traveling on orders. I presented proper military identification. I was verbally challenged, humiliated, and delayed access to the aircraft without cause. Silence. The agent scribbled notes. Karen fidgeted with the hem of her blazer. One of the agents looked up sharply. Did she question your legitimacy as a service member? Yes, sir, Danielle said. Karen's mouth fell open. I didn't know. She stopped herself too late. The room froze. She looked what? The agent pressed. Karen shrank back into her chair, mumbling something about policy, procedures, and confusion. Danielle kept her eyes forward, her face composed. She knew better than to let Karen's scrambling words crawl under her skin. The damage was already done, but this time, the whole world was about to see it. The senior agent turned to Karen. You grounded a plane full of passengers. You mishandled a uniformed soldier under federal protection. You may have triggered multiple violations, including civil rights infractions. You're being placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Karen's face crumpled. But I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't erase impact. The agent cut her off. Danielle stood slowly when they waved her up. Sergeant Harris, thank you for your patience and professionalism, said Agent Collins, extending his hand. Danielle shook it firmly, her posture perfect. We'll make sure a full report is filed. And Sergeant, he lowered his voice slightly. Command thanks you for staying composed. Danielle gave a small nod. Outside the glass room, she could see Karen, her face twisted in panic, frantically calling someone on her personal cell phone, mouthing words like lawyer and mistake. The agents were already securing Karen's ID badge, her airline credentials, her access cards, stripping her of the uniform she had once worn so proudly. Danielle stepped back into the terminal, the heavy afternoon sunlight pouring through. The vast windows. The whispers followed her now, but different ones. She's a soldier. They treated her like garbage. Hope she sues them. Danielle walked toward the USO lounge, her boots echoing across the polished tile. Her flight, her journey, had been delayed. But something bigger had just been set in motion. Not just for her, for every soldier who had ever been doubted, dismissed, degraded. Justice wasn't just coming, it had already taken flight, and this time, it wasn't going to land quietly. Ma'am, do you have a moment? A young woman in jeans and a NASA hoodie jogged up beside Danielle near the escalators. Danielle turned, still adjusting the strap of her duffel bag. The woman, barely mid-20s, held up her phone with a shaky smile. I just wanted to say thank you for your service, she said, voice cracking a little. And, also, your video? It's already blowing up. Danielle blinked. Video? The woman nodded, pushing the phone screen closer. There, front and center, was Danielle, calm and dignified in her seat, while the flight attendant shoved, dismissed, and humiliated her. The title above the viral post screamed, Airline staff pushes black female soldier, gets immediate karma, hundreds of thousands of views, thousands of furious comments. Danielle stared at the screen for a heartbeat. Her stomach twisted, a strange mix of shame, pride, and sadness. She hadn't asked for any of this. She had just wanted to board her flight. They're talking about it everywhere, the young woman added, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Twitter, TikTok, even Facebook moms groups. People are mad, ma'am, real mad. Danielle gave a soft smile, nodding once. Thank you, she said simply. The young woman beamed like she'd just shaken hands with a superhero. Danielle continued toward the elevators, her mind racing quietly beneath her calm exterior. Outside the glass walls of the terminal, news vans were already pulling up to the curb, their satellite dishes spinning into place. Reporters, wearing sharp blazers and rushed makeup, clutched microphones as they scrambled toward the entrance. The storm had broken, faster than even Danielle expected. Deep part of her, the part trained for combat, whispered, stay focused, stay smart, stay ahead. At the USO lounge, the volunteer at the front desk greeted her warmly, a retired Navy chief named Mr. Langston. "You must be Sergeant Harris," he said, already half rising from his seat. "Sir," Danielle nodded respectfully. Command called ahead. "We're setting up a private room for you," he said, guiding her past rows of soldiers napping in chairs and families clustered around vending machines. Inside a small office, cooler and quieter, Danielle dropped her duffel and exhaled. Langston handed her a sealed envelope, military orders stamped with urgent red ink. "They want you to wait here for further instructions," he said. "Understood," Danielle replied, unfolding the papers with careful hands. A soft knock interrupted them. Two men entered, both sharply dressed with the smooth, alert expressions of people who handled crises for a living. "Sergeant Harris?" the taller one asked, flashing credentials. "I'm Special Advisor Bennett from the Office of Military Public Affairs. This is my associate, Ms. Torres, Civil Rights Legal Counsel." Danielle stood at attention instinctively. Bennett smiled warmly, waving her down. "At ease, Sergeant. You're not in trouble. Quite the opposite, actually." Torres, a Latina woman in a Navy pantsuit, leaned forward. "The Department of Defense is aware of the situation. Very aware. We've been getting calls all morning. From senators, from veterans groups, even from major news outlets." Danielle stayed silent, processing. Bennett continued. "You are now part of an ongoing federal investigation into discriminatory practices by civilian contractors, including airlines under government transport agreements." Torres slid a thick folder across the desk. "You're within your full rights to pursue civil action. You're also being encouraged, unofficially, to speak out. America needs to see the dignity you showed today." Danielle's throat tightened. All her life, she had been taught not to make noise, not to draw attention, to survive quietly, professionally, but something deeper stirred now, a different kind of duty. Not to herself, to everyone who had ever been pushed, doubted, dismissed. "If I agree," she said slowly, "what happens next?" Torres smiled gently. "Next? You tell your story, Sergeant, your way." Danielle leaned back, feeling the weight of choice settle around her shoulders. Outside the small glass window, the flashing lights of news cameras danced like restless fireflies. This wasn't just about a ruined boarding process anymore. It was about something bigger, something breaking wide open. Langston returned with a tray, coffee, sandwiches, a bottle of water, and set it quietly on the table. "Eat something, Sergeant," he said kindly. "You're about to change a lot more than a flight schedule." Danielle managed a small, grateful smile. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself a sip of the lukewarm coffee. It tasted like dust and strength all mixed together. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her commanding officer. "Proud of you. Watch your six. We'll back you all the way." She swallowed hard. This wasn't a battlefield she had trained for, but it was one she was ready to fight on. She pulled out the envelope Torres had given her. Legal briefings, media talking points, rights protections. She flipped it open and, quietly, she began to read. Outside, a CNN camera caught a grainy, zoomed-in glimpse through the window. The black female soldier, still in uniform, still unbowed, still standing. America was already watching, and Danielle Harris was about to make sure they never looked away again. "Sergeant Harris?" The voice was polite but urgent, cutting through the low hum of the USO lounge. Danielle looked up. A woman in a gray pencil skirt and sensible heels stood there, holding a press badge. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and the thin gold line of a microphone cord ran from her blazer to a pack on her hip. "I'm Jessica Malone, CNN. Would you be willing to give a statement?" Danielle's first instinct was to say no. Tighten the armor, walk away, stay invisible. That was how she had survived in uniform and out, by not making herself a bigger target. But something in the woman's eyes, respectful, almost pleading, made her pause. Jessica stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It's your story, Sergeant. Right now people are telling it for you. Maybe you should be the one to tell it first." Danielle's fingers tightened slightly around her coffee cup. The room seemed to hush around her, time stretching thin. This was it, the crossroads. Hide or step forward. She set the coffee down gently. "I'll speak," she said, voice low but clear. Jessica exhaled in relief, giving a small nod. "We'll keep it simple, short, respectful. No ambushes." Within minutes, a small corner of the USO lounge had been transformed. Jessica's cameraman adjusted, a portable light, aiming it softly toward Danielle's face. No makeup crew, no fancy backdrops, just the plain blue wall and a battered armchair. Danielle sat down slowly, smoothing the fabric of her uniform over her knees. The camera light blinked red. Jessica leaned in. "Sergeant Harris," she began softly, "can you tell us what happened today?" Danielle's eyes didn't waver from the camera lens. She didn't blink away the discomfort or the vulnerability. She faced it. "Today, I was traveling on military orders. I wore this uniform because I've spent 14 years of my life earning it, but instead of being treated with dignity, I was treated like a liar, like an inconvenience." Her voice was steady, but behind it, the tension crackled, raw and real. "A flight attendant shoved me, questioned my right to wear this, treated me like an imposter." Jessica nodded gently, encouraging her to continue. "And for a moment," Danielle said, swallowing hard, "I felt like that scared little girl again. The one who was told she didn't belong in honors classes, didn't belong in leadership roles, didn't belong anywhere." The camera zoomed slightly, closer, catching the faint shine of emotion in her dark eyes. "But then I remembered who I am," Danielle said, her voice sharpening. "I'm a soldier, a daughter, a citizen. I don't need permission to stand where I stand." Jessica leaned forward. "What would you want to say to people watching this, Sergeant?" Danielle inhaled once, slow and controlled. "See us, respect us, believe that we are who we say we are, without needing to prove it, to shrink, or to apologize." A beat of silence. Jessica gave a tiny nod to her cameraman, and the red light blinked off. The room felt heavier now, like something important had just shifted. Danielle sat back in her chair, suddenly aware of the way her heart pounded against her ribs. Jessica leaned over. "That was powerful," she said quietly. "Thank you for trusting me." Danielle just nodded. Her voice locked somewhere deep in her chest. The cameraman packed up quickly, and within minutes, the small impromptu studio vanished like smoke. Jessica squeezed Danielle's hand briefly before slipping away into the throng of reporters gathering outside. Within 30 minutes, the clip was live. Within an hour, it had been shared across every major news outlet. Breaking news: Black female soldier speaks out after airline humiliation. I don't need permission to stand where I stand. The USO lounge buzzed as volunteers and soldiers alike watched the coverage unfold on the wall-mounted TV screens. A young airman in a baggy hoodie passed by Danielle's table, pausing awkwardly. "Sergeant Harris?" he said shyly. Danielle looked up. "Thank you," he said, voice rough with emotion. "For all of it." Danielle gave a soft nod. More soldiers drifted by, offering nods, thumbs up, small salutes. None of them said much. They didn't need to. It was all there, in their eyes, in their silent solidarity. Danielle sat back, feeling the strange, dizzying weight of it all settle in. She wasn't just one woman in a uniform anymore. She had become something else, something bigger. Outside the glass walls, more reporters clustered, jostling for position. Inside her pocket, her phone buzzed again and again. Texts from command, from old friends, from numbers she didn't even recognize. One message stood out, blinking at the top of her screen. "Senator Grace Morrison, we need to talk. Call me when you're ready." Danielle stared at it for a long time. Politics, power, policy. She hadn't signed up for any of that. And yet, here she was, at the crossroads of it all, a soldier, a story, a storm gathering speed. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, her fingers brushing the fabric of her uniform, not by accident, not by mistake, by design. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was leading, and this time, the world would follow, whether it was ready or not. Sergeant Harris, this is Senator Morrison's office. Are you available to speak now? The voice on the line was professional but urgent. Danielle sat at a small desk inside the USO Lounge's private room, her military sat phone pressed against her ear. Outside the frosted glass, the low buzz of television coverage filled the hallway. Like a rising tide, she answered calmly. Yes, sir, I'm ready. A soft click, then another voice came on. Older, firm, but warm. Danielle? This is Grace Morrison. I've seen the footage. I've read the preliminary reports. First, let me say, I am so sorry for what you went through. Danielle kept her voice even. Thank you, ma'am. Senator Morrison didn't waste time. I'm introducing legislation, a new Service Member Civil Rights Act. Your story will be part of the launch. If you're willing, I want you to stand with me when we announce it. Danielle leaned back slightly, absorbing the weight of the offer. Front page, live press conference, national audience, her face, her voice, her story. Visible, unavoidable. Will you do it? Morrison asked. Danielle closed her eyes briefly. She thought about the hallway at the airport, the shove, the dismissive glare. She thought about every young black soldier standing a little straighter today because someone, somewhere, had finally said enough. She thought about her mother, who had sewn her ROTC patch onto her first high school jacket with trembling hands, and about her father, who had once whispered, "They won't always see your worth, baby girl, but you show it anyway." Danielle opened her eyes. Yes, ma'am, she said. I'll stand with you. Morrison exhaled into the line, a sound of fierce relief. Good. Then let's get to work. 30 minutes later, Danielle found herself seated in a black town car, speeding away from the airport under a cloudy gray sky. Next to her sat Ms. Torres, the civil rights attorney, typing furiously on a slim silver laptop. Across from her, Advisor Bennett scrolled through a storm of headlines on his phone. Danielle stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Billboards, buses, people. Life moving forward, unaware that something seismic was unfolding just beneath the surface. The driver, an older black man with a salt and pepper beard, caught her eye briefly in the rearview mirror. He didn't say anything. He just tipped his head in a quiet nod of respect. Danielle returned it, a small, solemn gesture. The car slid to a stop in front of a hotel, tall glass windows gleaming under the heavy clouds. Inside, aides bustled everywhere, setting up a temporary press center, cameras on tripods. Microphones clipped to podiums, bright white banners with the senator's name in bold blue lettering. Danielle was led to a small conference room upstairs. Waiting there was a military stylist, a woman in jeans and a black t-shirt, carrying a small case of makeup and a steamer for her uniform. "We're just here to sharpen your look a little, Sergeant," she said kindly, "not change you. You're already perfect for them to see." Danielle allowed the woman to brush a little powder across her face to cut the shine under the bright lights. Her uniform was steamed, her boots polished until they gleamed like mirrors, but it was her eyes that needed no adjustment. Clear, sharp, unshakable. Downstairs, the room began to fill. Reporters, veterans advocates, political aides with lanyards and earpieces. A low, buzzing energy filled the air, like a thunderstorm ready to break. Senator Morrison, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a blue power suit, entered through a side door, walking directly to Danielle. She extended a hand. "Sergeant Harris, it's an honor." Danielle rose and shook her hand firmly. "Thank you, ma'am. The honor's mine." Morrison smiled, not the soft, political kind, but something sharper, fiercer. "Let's show them who you are." The aide at the podium called out, "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Press conference begins in 5 minutes." Danielle took her place behind Morrison. The lights above the stage were hot and blinding, the cameras pointed like weapons. The room buzzed with the restless energy of 100 hungry news outlets. Morrison stepped to the microphone. "Good afternoon. Today we confront an ugly truth. A decorated U.S. soldier, Sergeant Danielle Harris, was publicly humiliated, not by enemies abroad, but by disrespect at home." A murmur rippled through the crowd. She wore the cloth of our nation. She carried our flag on her shoulder. And she was treated like a fraud. Danielle stood tall behind her, shoulders squared, hands locked behind her back in parade rest. "We will not allow this to happen again," Morrison said, voice rising. "Today, I'm introducing the Service Member Civil Rights Act, a law that ensures no soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine will ever have to prove their worth at the gate of their own country." Flashes popped from cameras. Morrison turned slightly. And now, the woman who inspired this moment, and who reminds us all what real service looks like, Sergeant Danielle Harris. The room rose in a ripple of applause, hesitant at first, then swelling. Danielle stepped forward. The podium felt too big, the lights too bright, but when she gripped the edges of the lectern, she was steady. She didn't have a script. She didn't need one. She spoke from the marrow of her bones. "I didn't ask to be seen today," Danielle said, her voice cutting through the room. "I didn't want to become a story. I just wanted to do my job, to serve my country, and to be treated with the dignity that should come with wearing this uniform." Her voice didn't shake. It rang out, low, sure, and unforgettable. "If my story helps even one young soldier believe they belong, if it reminds this country that loyalty doesn't have a color or a gender, then maybe it was worth it." Another wave of applause rolled through the room, louder this time, heavier with meaning. Danielle stepped back, heart hammering, as Morrison squeezed her shoulder once. A silent thank you. In the sea of flashing lights and rising cheers, Danielle saw the truth at last. This wasn't about revenge. This was about remembrance, about respect, about reclaiming the space she had always deserved to stand in. And now, she wasn't standing alone. "Corporate wants you upstairs, now." The manager's voice was sharp, slicing through the break room chatter. Karen Bartlett, the flight attendant who had shoved Danielle Harris, stiffened in her seat, her coffee forgotten on the table. Around her, the other flight attendants looked away awkwardly, pretending to be busy checking their phones or adjusting their blazers. Nobody met her eyes. The viral video had reached everyone by now. It was unavoidable, splashed across news feeds, group chats, even internal memos. The video of her, shoving a black female soldier. The video of her, doubting a woman who had given more to this country than Karen ever had. Her palms were slick with sweat as she climbed the stairs to the upper-level offices. Everything felt wrong. The silence in the halls, the way doors clicked shut as she passed. At the top of the stairs, she found herself facing a panel. 3 executives seated behind a long glass table, their faces cold and unreadable. The airline's general counsel stood by the window, arms crossed. Karen swallowed hard. "Ms. Bartlett," the head of human resources began, voice clipped. "We've reviewed the footage, the passenger statements, and the Department of Defense complaint." Karen opened her mouth, but the man held up a hand. "You are here for your termination." Hearing. "You may speak if you wish, but be advised, the decision is already made." Karen's chest tightened painfully. "Please," she blurted. "It was a misunderstanding. She didn't look like—" She caught herself too late. The silence. In the room sharpened, the general counsel stepped forward. "Ms. Bartlett, you pushed a uniformed American soldier. You refused her boarding access without cause. You profiled her based on appearance, then lied to cover it up." He tossed a folder onto the table, copies of the security footage. Witness. "Reports. Danielle's formal military ID. We are terminating your employment effective immediately," he said flatly. "Your access badges are revoked. Your pension eligibility is under review pending outcome of federal investigations." Karen's knees went weak. "I didn't mean—" The HR head cut in. "Intent does not erase harm." Security officers entered quietly, waiting by the door. Karen knew. The drill. No yelling, no bargaining, just the long walk out. She gathered what little dignity she had left and stood up. But before she could leave, the general counsel added, "You should also expect personal litigation. Civil rights groups are already gathering plaintiffs. You'll be hearing from attorneys." Karen's throat closed. The door opened behind her, the bright hallway spilling light onto her face, Stark, brutal, undeniable. She walked out without looking back. In the elevator, the walls felt like they were closing in. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Texts from old coworkers, news alerts, vicious social media comments. By the time she stepped out onto the sidewalk, she was nobody again. Just another woman in a navy blazer, swallowed by the indifferent city. And somewhere, high above the noise, Sergeant Danielle Harris stood taller than ever. Meanwhile, in the polished conference rooms of the airline's headquarters, frantic damage control meetings were already underway. An emergency board meeting convened. PR advisors paced with grim faces. "We underestimated the fallout," one executive admitted, voice hollow. "The demographic numbers are brutal," said another. "Veterans groups, civil rights activists, the African American community, they're mobilizing boycotts. This isn't going away." The airline's CEO, a graying man in a charcoal suit, slammed his palm against the table. "We need a public apology, full accountability, reinstate stronger anti-bias training, launch a scholarship fund for minority service members, whatever it takes." An assistant stepped in, holding up a phone. "Sir, CNN is requesting a live statement within the hour. They're calling this the Danielle Harris moment," the CEO cursed under his breath. This wasn't just a PR nightmare, it was an institutional reckoning. The company's brand, its future, was on the line, and they all knew it. Back at the Tau Hotel, Danielle watched the airline's first public statement broadcast live on national news. The CEO stood stiffly behind a podium, reading from a carefully written script. "We are deeply sorry for the unacceptable mistreatment of Sergeant Danielle Harris," he said, his voice struggling to sound sincere. "We honor and respect all members of our military, and we take full responsibility for the actions of our former employee." Danielle's jaw tightened slightly. Former employee. So Karen had been fired. It didn't erase what happened, but it mattered. It mattered that someone, somewhere, was finally being held accountable. The CEO continued, "Effective immediately, we are instituting sweeping reforms to ensure that no service member, or any customer, is ever again treated with such disregard. We will be partnering with civil rights organizations and veterans groups to rebuild trust." Danielle leaned back against the hotel couch, arms crossed loosely over her chest. Her phone buzzed. Another text, this one from her commanding officer again. "You didn't just win your battle, Sergeant. You started a war for change. Proud of you." A soft knock came at the door. It was Ms. Torres, carrying a small stack of paperwork. "More media requests," she said with a wry smile. "Also, an invitation." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Invitation?" Torres nodded. "The White House wants you at the Veterans Day ceremony. Front row." Danielle's breath caught. The White House. Veterans Day front row. It felt surreal, like standing on a cliff's edge, the whole world sprawling out below. But this time, she wasn't falling, she was rising. "I'll be there," Danielle said simply. Torres smiled, slipping the invitation into Danielle's hand. Outside the window, the clouds were finally starting to break. Pale sunlight spilled across the city, touching rooftops, sidewalks, windows. Touching Danielle's face as she stood there, tall, steady, unshakable. The world was watching, and she was just getting started. "Sergeant Harris, please come this way." A young Marine in full dress uniform opened the heavy white door, ushering Danielle into the east wing of the White House. Her boots clicked softly against the polished marble floor as she followed him down. The corridor, past portraits of past presidents and framed American flags that seemed almost to whisper the weight of history. Danielle's uniform was flawless. Her ribbons, awards from deployments she never talked about, caught the light as she moved. But it wasn't just the uniform that made people step aside today. It was her story, her quiet strength, the way she had endured public humiliation, without rage, only dignity, and turned it into a call the whole country could hear. Inside the reception room, a cluster of senior officials waited. A woman in a dark suit, sharp-eyed, with a calm authority that radiated from her, stepped forward. "Sergeant Harris," she said warmly, offering a hand. "I'm Deputy Chief of Staff Monroe. We're honored to have you here." Danielle shook her hand firmly, her face composed, but her heart pounding just a little harder. "Thank you, ma'am," she said simply. Monroe smiled. "The President has personally requested that you stand with the First Lady during the ceremony. He'll acknowledge your service and your courage." During his remarks, Danielle's stomach tightened, not fear. Readiness, acceptance, responsibility. She nodded once. "Understood, ma'am." Across the room, a photographer with a government badge adjusted his lens, snapping a few quiet shots as aides murmured and checked their watches. The ceremony was minutes away, and Danielle was about to step onto a stage she never asked for, but was born ready to stand on. Outside, the south lawn was already filled. Rows of white chairs stretched across the green grass. Flags whipped in the crisp November breeze. Veterans in uniforms, old and new, sat shoulder to shoulder. Army greens, Navy whites, Air Force blues. Civilians, too. Families, politicians, reporters, all waiting for something more than just another speech. Waiting for a reminder of what honor really looked like. Danielle stood just behind the main podium, beside the First Lady, who offered her a warm, knowing smile. "Thank you for being here," the First Lady whispered. Danielle nodded slightly. "It's my duty," she whispered back. The crowd fell into a hush. The President stepped up to the microphone, his face solemn beneath the bright sun. "Today, we honor those who have worn the uniform of our nation," he began. "We remember their sacrifices, their strength, and their unwavering belief in the promise of America." Danielle stood tall, the breeze tugging lightly at the hem of her jacket. The President's voice lowered, growing heavier. "And today we also recognize that the struggle for dignity and respect does not end on the battlefield. It continues here, at home." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Sergeant Danielle Harris," the President said, turning slightly toward her, "stood not just for herself, but for every service member who deserves to be seen, honored, and respected without question." Applause burst across the lawn, loud, sustained, rolling like distant thunder. Danielle's chest rose and fell once, controlled, as she met the gaze of hundreds of faces turned toward her. Some clapped. Some wiped their eyes. Some simply stood, hands over hearts. The President continued. "Her quiet courage has sparked change across our institutions. Because of her, new protections will stand where prejudice once stood." Danielle blinked against the brightness but didn't look away. Not now. Not ever again. When the applause faded, the ceremony continued. Medals awarded, names read aloud, wreaths laid at the memorial stones. But the moment, her moment, had already carved itself into history. After the ceremony, Danielle found herself in the Rose Garden, a small plate of food untouched in her hand. Conversations swirled around her, senators, generals, journalists. But she stood quietly, at the edge, content to watch. She didn't need the spotlight. She never had. "Mind if I join you?" She turned to see an older black man approaching, walking with the steady grace of someone who had seen too much to be hurried by anything anymore. His blazer bore a small pin, the emblem of the Tuskegee Airmen. Danielle straightened instinctively, a deep reverence filling her chest. "Please," she said. He smiled and sat beside her on the low stone wall. "You remind me of a lot of us," he said, voice rich and warm. "Took a lot of hits, never stopped standing." Danielle looked at him, this living piece of history, and felt something deep inside her settle. "I'm just trying to do my part," she said. He chuckled softly. "Baby, you already have." He patted her hand once, a simple, powerful gesture, then rose and tipped his hat. "Keep standing," he said. "They're watching now, and they need to see you stand." Danielle watched him disappear into the crowd. The sky overhead stretched wide and blue. For the first time in a long time, Danielle didn't feel like she had to hold her breath just to survive in her own country. She breathed deep. She stood easy. She belonged, without apology. without question. And the world? The world was finally learning to catch up. "We can't let this happen again," said the Secretary of Transportation, voice low and urgent. In a private conference room, 2 blocks from the White House, top officials from multiple agencies sat around a heavy oak table. Their faces were drawn, their notebooks full. On a large monitor at the front of the room, the headline blared, "Airline Scandal Deepens. More service members share horror stories after Danielle Harris." Incident story after story poured across the screen. Soldiers humiliated. Veterans denied service. Military spouses insulted while traveling. It wasn't just about Danielle anymore. It was bigger. It was systemic. "Public trust is plummeting," said the Deputy Director of Homeland Security, flipping through a thick report. "Especially among veterans and minority communities." The Secretary of Defense leaned forward, hands clasped. "We need a federal standard. For military travel rights, mandatory training, severe penalties for any company contracting with the government." Murmurs of agreement circled the room. Danielle's calm defiance had cracked open something deeper, an ugly truth that could no longer be ignored. The President's Chief of Staff tapped his pen thoughtfully against the table. "Harris didn't just survive humiliation. She exposed a culture of disrespect most Americans don't see." He looked around the room, voice sharper now. "If we don't act decisively, we're complicit." Heads nodded grimly. Action plans were drafted. Committees were formed. Deadlines set. Behind closed doors, powerful people moved urgently, not out of charity, but out of necessity. Because Danielle Harris had done what most institutions fear most. She had made silence impossible. Meanwhile, back at her hotel, Danielle sat on the narrow windowsill, phone in hand. Outside, the city lights blinked lazily against the early evening sky. Her duffel bag was still packed neatly by the door. Old habit, ready to move at a moment's notice. She scrolled through her messages, hundreds of them, messages from old friends, messages from strangers, messages from mothers saying, "My daughter wants to be like you." A knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Advisor Bennett and Ms. Torres standing there, wearing the subtle smiles of people delivering good news. "Permission to enter, Sergeant?" Bennett said playfully. Danielle stepped back, waving them inside. Torres handed her a crisp manila folder. "We thought you should see this first." Danielle flipped it open. Inside was a letter, printed on thick official stationery. She read aloud quietly. "The Department of Defense hereby invites Sergeant Danielle Harris to serve as Special Advisor to the Military Civil Rights Task Force. Your service, both in uniform and in the civilian sphere, has proven invaluable to the ongoing mission of ensuring dignity, equity, and respect for all service members." Danielle looked up, stunned. Torres smiled wider. "You'd be helping shape real policy, Sergeant, not just a symbol, a leader." Danielle set the folder down carefully. This wasn't what she had imagined when she woke up 2 days ago, slinging her duffel over her shoulder, expecting just another flight. It wasn't what she had imagined when that hand had shoved her back, small and shamed against the cold jetway wall. But it was real. And it was hers. "When do they need an answer?" Danielle asked. "They said whenever you're ready," Bennett said. "But between us, they're hoping you'll say yes." Danielle let out a slow, thoughtful breath. "Tell them I'll think about it," she said. Torres and Bennett exchanged a glance but nodded respectfully. As they left, Danielle returned to the window, the letter still in her hands. Outside, beyond the glowing streets and monuments, a new future waited. A future she could help build, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever worn the uniform and been asked, "Are you sure you belong?" A future where the answer would finally, unquestionably, be yes. Later that night, Danielle walked the empty streets near the hotel. The cool air brushed against her skin, the city humming quietly around her. No reporters, no cameras, just her and the quiet rhythm of her boots on the sidewalk. She passed the Lincoln Memorial, the great stone figure watching silently over the reflecting pool. Danielle paused at the steps, gazing up. She thought about the words etched there. Words written long before her time, but meant for moments just like this. All men are created equal. Words so simple, so pure, and still, so fiercely unfinished. She stood there for a long time, letting the truth of it settle deep inside her bones. This wasn't about being famous. It wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about finishing the work, making those words real. Not just for some, but for all. Danielle drew a slow breath, lifted her chin, and whispered to the cold night air, "I'm ready." The words disappeared, into the darkness. But she knew they mattered. She knew they would echo back, because change wasn't a speech. It wasn't a headline. It was 1,000 quiet decisions to stand tall, even when the world tried to shove you back. And Danielle Harris, she wasn't just standing, she was moving forward, one step at a time. Unstoppable now. "Mom, you gotta see this." 12-year-old Marcus Johnson sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, eyes wide at the TV. Across the screen, a news anchor replayed the now famous clip, Sergeant Danielle Harris, standing proud at the White House, her uniform sharp under the sun. His mother, Tanya, drying dishes in the kitchen, peeked around the corner. "Who's that, baby?" Marcus pointed excitedly. "That's her, the soldier they were talking about. She stood up to them, and now they're changing laws and stuff." Tanya set the towel down slowly, heart thudding. She crossed the room, sitting beside her son. Together, they watched as the anchor spoke. Since Sergeant Harris's story went viral, thousands of service members have come forward with their own experiences of discrimination. New legislation is being proposed. Airline companies are scrambling to update policies. Civic groups are calling this a national reckoning for how we treat our heroes. Tanya blinked back tears, not just because of the story, because of what it meant for her son. For every black child watching, learning that dignity wasn't something they had to beg for, it was something they deserved. "She's like a superhero," Marcus said, eyes shining. Tanya smiled softly, brushing a hand over his tight curls. "She's better than a superhero, baby," she said. "She's real." Across the country, the chain reaction spread like wildfire. At Fort Bragg, soldiers gathered around the base canteen TV, fists thumping tables in solidarity, as Danielle's interview played on repeat. At community centers, civil rights leaders met late into the night, drafting letters, organizing protests, planning scholarships. At airports, gate agents huddled into mandatory new training sessions, watching grim videos on unconscious bias, racial profiling, and military respect codes, all because of one woman who refused to shrink. At recruiting stations, young black women filled out enlistment papers with proud, steady hands, whispering Danielle's name like a promise. And at newsrooms, editorial boards published op-eds under bold headlines, "America's soldiers deserve better." The Danielle Harris effect, dignity in uniform. When strength meets grace, a new American icon. It wasn't just a story anymore, it was a movement. Danielle sat in a small cafe near the Capitol, nursing a cup of black coffee, the early morning light spilling across the checkered floor. She wore jeans and a hoodie now, civilian clothes, but head still turned as people passed by. A man in a suit paused at the door, hesitated, then walked over. "Sergeant Harris?" he asked quietly. Danielle looked up, offering a polite smile. "Just Danielle today," she said gently. The man smiled awkwardly, shifting a little. I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've done." Danielle nodded once, accepting it with quiet grace. When he left, she leaned back in her chair, staring out the window. A little boy in a red jacket walked by, tugging his mother's hand, chattering excitedly about the soldier lady on TV. Danielle smiled faintly. She hadn't asked to be anyone's symbol. She had just been trying to get home, but maybe, somehow, that made it mean even more. She had stood up not because she wanted to be seen, but because dignity demanded it. And now the world was standing with her. Later that afternoon, Danielle met with Ms. Torres and Advisor Bennett at a quiet conference room overlooking the National Mall. Papers were spread across the table. Proposals, drafts, invitation letters, Task Force is official now, Bennett said, sliding a thick folder toward her. You're listed as special advisor. You'll be helping draft federal guidelines for civilian interactions with service members. Torres grinned. You're going to help write history, Sergeant. Danielle tapped the folder lightly with 2 fingers. Not just for soldiers, she said. They looked at her, eyebrows raised. Danielle leaned forward, voice steady. For everybody who's ever been asked to prove they deserve respect, not just the ones in uniform. Torres's smile widened. Exactly. The possibilities sprawled out before her. Policy changes, education reforms, national conversations. Real impact. Real change. The kind of change that starts not with shouting, but with standing, with refusing to be shoved back. With standing. Tall until the world has no choice but to adjust around you. That evening, Danielle wandered down to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The black granite walls shimmered in the soft glow of the setting sun, names etched deep into the surface. She ran her fingers lightly over the cool stone, reading the names, aloud in her mind. Men. Women. Heroes. Many of them had never been honored properly until it was too late. Danielle pressed her palm flat against the wall, feeling the weight of their sacrifices. I won't waste it, she whispered. I promise. A soft wind stirred the autumn leaves at her feet, lifting them into lazy spirals. And in that quiet, sacred space, Danielle made a vow. Not just to the fallen, but to the living, to the future. Soldiers. The overlooked, the underestimated. She would fight for them all, not with anger, but with purpose, not with vengeance, but with vision. Because real change, lasting change, wasn't made in moments of rage. It was made in moments of courage. And Danielle Harris? She was courage, walking. Last call for Flight 223 to Dallas. All remaining passengers, please proceed to Gate 12. The overhead announcement crackled across the airport terminal. Danielle stood in line at the gate, her duffel slung over one shoulder, dressed again in her Army combat uniform. The familiar weight of the fabric comforted her, steady, unshakable. Today was different, though. This time, the stares she felt weren't suspicious. They were respectful, grateful. A little boy in a Spider-Man backpack tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering loudly, "Look, Mommy, a real hero." Danielle offered him a small smile and a nod. The mother smiled back, warm, no hesitation, no fear. Danielle stepped forward to the gate agent, a middle-aged white woman in a navy blazer. The woman looked up, saw the uniform, and her entire face lit up. "Sergeant Harris," she said immediately, voice soft with reverence. "Thank you for your service. We're honored to have you flying with us today." She scanned Danielle's ticket and gestured toward the priority boarding lane. No hesitation, no second guessing, just quiet, genuine respect. Danielle thanked her with a nod and moved through the gate. The jetway stretched ahead, the same gray carpet, the same narrow walls. But this time, no one shoved her, no one blocked her, no one doubted her right to be there. She walked with quiet steps, each one erasing a little more of the old ache still clinging to the memory of that awful day. Inside the plane, a young flight attendant, a black woman with braids tucked neatly under her, Kewatin greeted her. "Welcome aboard, Sergeant. Your seat's been upgraded, First Class 1A. Danielle blinked, surprised. "That's not necessary," she started to say. But the attendant smiled kindly. "It's already done, courtesy of the captain." Danielle nodded, heart full. She slid into the wide seat, tucked her bag under the chair, and settled back. Out the window, the late afternoon sun dipped low, setting the sky ablaze in hues of orange and gold. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest traveling with us today, Sergeant Danielle Harris, United States Army, who has inspired our entire nation with her courage and dignity." Applause broke out across the cabin, warm, genuine. A few passengers even stood. Danielle sat still, overwhelmed, her throat tightening, painfully. She lifted her hand slightly in acknowledgement, A simple, humble salute. Across the aisle, an older woman pressed her hand to her heart, tears shining in her eyes. Danielle closed her own eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the applause wash over her like a benediction. Not fame, not glory, recognition. Real, hard-earned respect, the kind that didn't come from shouting or demanding, the kind that came from standing, quietly, fiercely, even when the world tried to push you down. Especially then. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Danielle's phone buzzed gently in her pocket. One new message. It was from Marcus, the little boy she had met briefly at a charity event the week before. The boy who had looked up at her like she was something bigger than life. His message was short, just a photo. Him, standing proud in his JROTC uniform. Beneath it, 4 simple words. I'm standing too now. Danielle felt the tears prick the backs of her eyes. She tucked the phone back into her pocket and leaned her head against the window. Outside, the plane picked up speed, roaring down the runway, lifting, rising, just like her, just like all the others who would come after her. Standing taller, because someone once had refused to step aside. 30,000 feet above the ground, Danielle looked out over the quilt of clouds below. The sky stretched wide and endless before her, limitless, waiting. And she realized something. This wasn't the end of her story. Not even close. It was just the beginning. Because real change doesn't land in one day. It takes flight again and again, carried by every voice that speaks up, every hand that reaches out, every soul that refuses to shrink. Danielle Harris would keep standing, keep walking, keep rising. And now, the whole world was rising with her.